Coming home unexpectedly, I found filthy workers inside my own room. My daughter-in-law just smiled. It's preparation for the move. But the next morning she was the one screaming, "Why is the police at the door?" Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now let's get started. I pushed the door open and the world shifted under me like the floor had been pulled away. For a moment, I thought I had stepped into the wrong house. The smell hit me first, sharp, chemical, suffocating. Wet paint, thick and sour, clung to the air like betrayal itself. Two men in dirty, splattered coveralls stood in the center of my bedroom, their rollers moving in steady, thoughtless strokes. Gray. A heavy industrial gray. They were burying my coral walls beneath it, erasing the warmth I had chosen with such care, blotting out the color that had once reminded me of sunsets and quiet promises of survival. My curtains, the floral ones I had saved up for months to buy, lay in a tangled heap on the floor. Muddy boot prints ran over the fabric, flattening the flowers into smears of dirt. My dresser, the lacquered oak one I had polished every Sunday like it was an altar, bore new freckles of careless paint. A drop slid down the mirror, distorting my reflection into something warped, as if the house itself no longer recognized me. At the doorway blocking my path stood my son, my Alex. Arms folded across his chest, his expression carved from stone, his gaze somewhere above my head, as though I were a stranger intruding on his plans. And next to him, like the director of this quiet invasion, was Megan, my daughter-in-law. Her ponytail swung as she tilted her head, her lips curved in the faintest smile, not of joy but of satisfaction. "Just preparing for the move," she said, her voice light, casual, like she was talking about rearranging furniture, not dismantling my life. She didn't even glance at me. I froze in the doorway, the bakery apron still stiff against my waist, dusted with flour, carrying the smell of yeast and burnt crust. My body ached from 12 hours of lifting trays, kneading dough, scrubbing ovens. I had come home early, just one blessed hour early, to rest my swollen feet and sip tea beside the marigolds blooming by my porch. Instead, I stood in my own house watching strangers paint over my walls. My voice came out cracked, barely human. "Who decided this?" Alex shrugged. That same shrug I remembered from when he was 14, when his chores lay undone and his excuses came ready. The same shrug he had used when teachers called about skip classes, when the car broke down because oil hadn't been changed, when bills went unpaid. The shrug that said, "Not my fault, not my burden, not my care. Too much house for one person," he said, his tone flat, as though he were reading a fact from a newspaper. Too much house. Too much me. Too much of everything I had sacrificed to give him a childhood, a future, a place to come back to. The words didn't just bruise, they carved. I looked at him, at the man my son had become. His hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, eyes darting to Megan as if waiting for her approval. She stood straight, her manicured fingers clasped behind her back, lips pursed with the authority of someone who had never worked a 12-hour shift in her life. The workers didn't look at me. They kept rolling, 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 drowning my coral walls in lifeless gray. Each stroke sounded louder than hammers. With every pass of the roller, something inside me frayed. The years of holding on, of surviving, of believing my sacrifices would be honored. I swallowed against the acrid tang in my throat. "Preparing for the move?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "Whose move?" Megan finally turned her eyes on me. Hazel eyes cool as glass. "Ours. Yours. Everyone's. It's time to consolidate." Consolidate. As if my life were a balance sheet. As if my walls, my curtains, my dresser, my memories were numbers to be added and subtracted, rearranged for efficiency. My hands shook. I thought of the thousands I had lent them over the years, no, not lent, given. The checks for hospital bills. The envelope slipped into Alex's hands when rent was overdue again. The money for their honeymoon, their second car, Megan's dental work, the endless stream of just until payday requests that never came with repayment. Every dollar scraped from my back and shoulders after decades of carrying trays, waking before dawn, coming home with wrists burning and ankles swollen. And this was what I had earned. Strangers with rollers. A daughter-in-law with her back straight and chin high. A son too weak to meet my eyes. One of the painters leaned down to dip his roller in a bucket, sending a splatter of gray across my floorboards. He whistled as he worked, oblivious. The sound grated, careless, as though my sanctuary were just another contract job. "Alex," I whispered. "This is my room." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His eyes flicked toward Megan again, searching her face before he answered. "It's too much house, Mom. You don't need all this space. It's inefficient." I stared at him. Inefficient. My son who couldn't keep a job for more than 6 months. My son who had called me crying more than once when bills piled too high. My son who had eaten bread from my bakery when there was nothing else in his fridge. And now he dared to call my life inefficient. Megan smirked slightly, a corner of her mouth lifting as if she had heard my thoughts. "You'll thank us later. Downsizing will be easier on you." The sharp smell of paint coiled around me, digging into my chest. My lungs ached, but it wasn't the chemicals. It was the betrayal. It was my own son standing shoulder to shoulder with a woman who looked at my life like it was a problem to be solved. I felt my throat close, not from age or exhaustion but from the cruel realization. I had come home an hour early, hoping for rest. And instead I found I no longer belonged. Not even in my own bedroom. I stepped forward, the soles of my shoes sticking to the drop cloth spread across my floor. My coral walls, the walls I had painted myself after my husband's death, the color that had brought me back from the edge of grief, were disappearing. Gray swallowing coral, betrayal swallowing memory. "Stop," I said, but my voice was so thin, so fragile, it was lost under the roller's rasp. Megan crossed her arms. "Nora, you're tired. We'll handle it." My name stripped bare without warmth. Not Mom. Not Mrs. Clark. Just Nora, like I was a tenant being managed, a name on a piece of paper. The workers didn't pause. Alex didn't move. Megan tilted her head and watched me, waiting for me to break. The paint roller hissed across the wall, burying the last patch of coral. And I realized they were not painting walls. They were painting me out. 40 years. That's how long my hands had known ovens, knives, and dough. 40 years of burns across my wrists. Thin pale lines I wore like a second wedding band. 40 years of cuts that healed crooked, of nails ground short by flour and steel trays. My body is a map of kitchens. Scars on fingers, a stiff shoulder from carrying bags of flour heavier than I was. Calluses that no lotion could smooth away. Every dollar I ever earned came the same way. Through heat, through ache, through standing when I wanted nothing more than to sit. When people taste bread, they think of comfort. When I taste bread, I think of sacrifice. I think of waking up at 3:30 a.m. so the ovens would be ready for customers at dawn. I think of cleaning grease traps long after the lights in the dining room had gone dark. I think of all the mornings I walked home with my apron stiff as cardboard, smelling of yeast and sugar, my body buzzing with exhaustion. And then widowhood came uninvited 12 years ago. My Robert left one morning with a headache and never came home. A stroke, they said. Quick, they said. As if the speed of his leaving made the loss gentler. It didn't. The silence he left behind was the kind that howls. Alex was 25 then, still my gentle boy. At least that's what I told myself. He brought me tea in those first weeks, checked on me after late shifts, made sure the house didn't fall apart while I learned to sleep without Robert's breath beside me. I remember looking at him and thinking, Robert would be proud. But time changes children, and sometimes it's not the kind of change you pray for. Alex met Megan, and with her came shiny dreams, bigger cars, flashier trips, a life that sparkled but was always paid for with someone else's wallet. Europe vacations that somehow needed my temporary help. Designer strollers for children I raised in thrift store cribs. Better neighborhoods they scorned me for not affording myself, even as I paid their rent for them. Every time the phone rang I braced. Just until payday. The hospital bill was more than we expected. The landlord's threatening eviction. My savings leaked away like flour dust in an open sack. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. They never repaid. They never even pretended to. I lent without asking because work had taught me something cruel but true. Every dollar is half an hour of backache. And no one defends you if you don't defend yourself. That lesson should have been enough to protect me, but when it came to Alex, I ignored it. A mother convinces herself that sacrifice is the purest form of love, that giving until it hurts will one day come back in gratitude. I told myself the money didn't matter. But it did. Because money wasn't just numbers, it was my hours, my health, my body. It was my life converted into paper. That's why I hid cash the way other women hid jewelry. Envelopes tucked in flower tins. Bills folded into the hems of coats. Coffee cans buried in the shed. A few rolled tight and slipped behind photo frames. My own bank guarded with paranoia because I knew one thing. Once you hand it over, you never see it again. And when I finally picked out that coral paint from my bedroom, it wasn't just decoration. It was a declaration. Coral was the first color I chose, not because it was cheap, not because it was practical, not because it matched Robert's taste. I chose it because it was mine. I remember standing in the hardware aisle, holding the paint chip between my fingers, feeling ridiculous and giddy all at once. I had never allowed myself such a choice. The color looked like the inside of a peach, like the last pink glow before the sun drops behind rooftops. Warm, forgiving, alive. When I rolled that paint onto my walls, I felt something crack open inside me. It was the first sunset I had ever bought that didn't come with rent due. The first time a room truly belonged to me, not a landlord, not a husband, not a son. The coral walls weren't just color, they were freedom. And freedom has a price. The price was every burn on my arms, every cut that healed crooked, every hour I spent bent over trays instead of in bed. It was every Sunday I spent working while Megan snapped pictures of brunches I had unknowingly financed. It was every ache in my bones that whispered, "This is what survival costs." That's why, when I came home that day and saw rollers burying the coral under gray, I felt more than anger. I felt robbery. They weren't repainting. They were stealing. They were erasing proof that I had ever built something that was mine alone. I wanted to scream at Alex, to shake him and ask if he remembered the woman who carried him through winters on tips and day-old bread. I wanted to ask Megan if she understood that every time she asked for money, she was asking for another scar on my body. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stood in the doorway, watching the gray spread like infection. Watching strangers paint over my freedom as my son and his wife spoke of consolidation, of efficiency, as if my life were a spreadsheet, not 40 years of labor. And I thought of every dollar I had handed them, every bill that vanished from my hidden jars, every hour of my life I had given away, and realized that to them it had all been invisible. To them I was invisible. The day I signed the deed, the sky was the color of old tin. Clouds pressed low, threatening rain. But I felt brighter than I had in years. The papers lay in front of me, thin sheets that carried the weight of my life. The realtor, a slick man in a navy blazer, tapped his pen against the line where I was supposed to sign. He had shown me the place with the same false enthusiasm he probably gave to everyone. Quaint, potential, great starter home. But when I handed him $30,000 in cash, his smile changed. It wasn't the polite curve of a salesman anymore. It was surprise, then respect, then the realization that I was not another woman begging for a loan. "No mortgage?" he asked, almost suspicious. "No mortgage," I answered, pressing my pen into the paper hard enough to dent it. The key was cold in my palm when he slid it across the table. Small, worn, with teeth filed unevenly. To anyone else it was just another house key. To me it was armor-proof salvation. That night, I slept on the bare floor of the cottage. No furniture, no curtains, just a borrowed blanket and the sound of rain drumming on the roof. The walls smelled faintly of mildew, the floors creaked like bones, and there was a damp chill that curled into my spine. But it was mine. For the first time in decades, I did not fear a landlord's knock, another rent increase, another notice taped to the door. No one could send me away. I lay on the hardwood, staring at the cracked ceiling, and whispered to Robert, "We did it, love. I'm an owner now." I remembered the day we moved into our first apartment, 35 years earlier. Robert carried a mattress on his back while I trailed behind with a box of pots and pans. We had nothing but second-hand furniture and a belief that love would fill the rest. And for a while it did. But there was always rent. Always a landlord's shadow. Even when Robert was alive, we never touched the ground we stood on. We only borrowed it. Now, with him gone, I had finally planted a flag of my own. On Sundays I painted. The living room first. A shade of cream that brightened even cloudy afternoons. I rolled paint with slow, steady strokes, humming under my breath the way I had once hummed lullabies to Alex. In the bathroom I chose a pale mint that reminded me of toothpaste commercials from the 60s, cheerful and absurd, but somehow comforting. The bedroom I left for last. I wanted to savor it. I taped the edges carefully, laid down the drop cloth, and opened the can of coral. The smell of fresh paint rose like promise. With each stroke, the walls bloomed into warmth. It was as though the sun had decided to stay inside my house, settling into every corner. I painted until my arms ached, until sweat slid down my temples, until my knees throbbed from kneeling. When I finally stepped back, the room glowed. My room. My color. I fixed the faucet myself, watching old VHS tapes from the library that explained plumbing in halting, fuzzy frames. The first time the water ran without leaking, I laughed out loud, a sound that startled even me. I planted marigolds along the porch. $10 for a flat of seedlings. Their petals flared bright orange, stubborn little suns against the weeds. Neighbors walked by and nodded. "Looks better already," one man said. His approval didn't matter, but I tucked it away like a secret prize. Inside, I burned candles, lavender, vanilla, cinnamon. I filled the house with scents I had never dared to buy when every penny went to rent or Alex's emergencies. The silence of the house was not the silence of widowhood. It was the silence of ownership, of peace. No footsteps above me, no televisions blaring through thin walls, no landlord stomping upstairs. Just me, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint crackle of a candle's wick. At first, the emptiness felt like a cavern. I would catch myself setting an extra plate on the counter, listening for Robert's heavy boots or Alex's childish laugh. But slowly the emptiness softened. It became space, not absence. A border around me. Sometimes I sat by the east-facing window at dawn, coffee steaming in my hands, and watched the first light pour in. The sun crept across the floorboards, pale gold turning the coral walls into fire. Those mornings I felt like I had been reborn inside the very glow of survival. Neighbors asked if I had family nearby. I said yes, though the truth was more complicated. Alex and Megan lived 20 minutes away, but the distance was measured in more than miles. I had given them money for deposits, cars, bills. I had covered their emergencies and their dreams. But this house, this one small creaking cottage with its marigolds and coral bedroom, was something I had given only to myself. One evening I sat on the porch steps, dirt under my fingernails from planting, and realized, for the first time in decades, no one else had a claim on me. Not Robert's memory, not Alex's debts, not Megan's demands. The key in my palm was mine alone. It should have been enough to keep me safe. But in families, safety is never a guarantee. The day I decided to invite everyone over, I woke before dawn. The air in the cottage was cool, damp with early autumn, but my chest felt warm. This was not another morning of dragging myself into the bakery. This was a day for me. A day to prove that all the years of labor had bought more than pain. They had bought a home. I began in the kitchen, rolling out lasagna noodles on the same wooden board Robert and I had once kneaded bread upon. The dough clung slightly to my fingers, the flour rising in soft puffs that coated the counter like snowfall. I layered ricotta, mozzarella, a sauce I had simmered the night before with fresh basil from the neighbor's garden. The scent of garlic and tomatoes filled the house, seeping into the wood and fabric. By mid-morning, the table was already half set. My best china, the pale cream plates with faint gold rims that had spent most of their lives locked away, waiting for an occasion. Today was that occasion. A peach pie cooled on the windowsill, its crust cracked just so, sugar glittering on top like frost. A bowl of salad rested in the refrigerator, lettuce crisp and waiting, basil still releasing its sweet, peppery aroma. I vacuumed, dusted, polished. My back ached, but it was a proud ache, the kind that says, "This house is mine and today it will shine." By 3 o'clock, people began to arrive. My cousin Tasha first, carrying a bottle of wine and her familiar booming laugh. "Nora, you did it," she said, crushing me in a hug. "Look at you, homeowner." Her eyes glistened as she stepped inside, admiring the walls, the marigolds outside, the neatness I had fought to create. Neighbors followed, Raoul from next door, who always waved when I watered the yard, Mrs. Jenkins from across the street, bringing a basket of rolls, even the postman who'd heard there was peach pie and came shyly with a card congratulating me. They filled the house with voices, clinking glasses, and the kind of warmth I hadn't felt in years. "Beautiful place, Nora. So cozy. You've worked so hard. You deserve this." Each compliment was a balm, proof that the bruises of labor had not been for nothing. For a few shining hours I felt like the center of a circle, not its burden. It was nearly 5 when Alex and Megan arrived. Late, as always, carrying nothing but themselves. Megan stepped in first, her perfume sharp, her heels clicking against the wood. She looked around like a realtor, eyes sweeping corners, ceilings, cracks. Alex followed, mumbling a greeting, already pulling out his phone as if the house bored him. "Old tile," Megan murmured, running a manicured finger along the kitchen counter. "Bad block," Alex added, glancing through the window. "Property values here don't hold." "And look," Megan said, pointing at the window. "Leaks. Condensation already. This won't last." The words sliced through the air, flattening the compliments that still hovered like birds. The room grew quiet. Tasha's smile faltered. Raoul shifted uncomfortably. I forced myself to stand straighter. "It's mine," I said softly, as if reminding myself. Megan smiled, thin and tight. "That's why we're saying you'd be better off selling. Combine the money with ours, get a bigger place. One that fits all of us." All of us. The phrase rang like a warning bell. Her voice carried no warmth, no invitation. It was a declaration. She was already placing herself inside my walls, inside my freedom. "No," I said simply. Alex glanced up from his phone then, frowning like a boy denied candy. "Mom, be reasonable. We can't keep throwing money at rent when you have this." I looked at him, at the stubble he hadn't bothered to shave, the shirt creased from being worn twice, the eyes that darted to Megan before meeting mine. My son. My only child. And yet the distance between us was wider than the gap between the walls. "This house is mine," I repeated. Megan's eyes narrowed. She said nothing more, but the silence was sharper than words. She looped her arm through Alex's and guided him toward the dining table. Her smile fixed, her eyes cold. Dinner resumed, but the flavor had changed. The lasagna still melted on tongues, the peach pie still flaked sweetly, but underneath ran a current of unease. My guests tried to revive the cheer, laughter here, a toast there. But Megan's inspection had left its mark. She whispered in Alex's ear as others spoke, her gaze flicking toward cracks in the ceiling, uneven boards in the floor. Her lips moved like a ledger being calculated. I saw it then with painful clarity. My celebration was their appraisal. While I poured wine and cut pie, they were tallying square footage, calculating resale value, rehearsing how to wrest it from me. When the last guest hugged me goodbye and the house fell quiet, I sat alone on the porch steps. The marigolds glowed faintly in the dusk, their orange petals catching the last of the sun. I wrapped my sweater around me and listened to the distant chirp of crickets. I should have felt defeated. But instead something new rose in me. Anger, yes, but also resolve. I realized I had witnesses now, Raoul, Tasha, neighbors who had seen with their own eyes that this house was mine, that I had worked for it, that I had claimed it with my own labor. If Alex and Megan tried to force me, I would not be alone in saying no. The evening air was cool against my skin. I sat there a long time, letting the silence settle, feeling the house breathe around me. The walls coral cream mint stood firm. And I whispered to them as if they were listening, "No one will take you from me." 3 weeks after the dinner that turned sour, the call came. It was late, almost midnight, when the phone vibrated on the nightstand. For one foolish heartbeat, I thought it might be Robert, calling from some heaven with a payphone. But of course it was Alex. My son's name glowing on the screen like an alarm. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to answer. But motherhood is an old chain, rusted but unbreakable. I pressed the button. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, urgent. "I need $900. Rent's due tomorrow. If I don't pay, the kids and Megan will be on the street." I sat up in bed, the coral walls around me glowing faintly in the lamplight. I thought of my $10 marigolds outside, small but defiant. I thought of the coins I still tucked into coffee cans, of the hours I spent bending and lifting at the bakery, of the ache in my lower back that never left. "Handle it yourself, Alex," I said quietly. There was a pause, as if he couldn't believe he'd heard me correctly. Then his voice sharpened. "Since you got that little palace, you've forgotten family." Palace. The word curdled in my stomach. My 2-room cottage, my weedy yard, my patched roof. A palace? But to him maybe it was. Because to him it wasn't just a house. It was money. Liquid money he believed he had a claim to. "I haven't forgotten family," I answered steady. I've remembered myself. The silence on the line was thick. I could almost hear him grinding his teeth. Then a muttered curse and the call ended. I lay back down but sleep wouldn't come. The phone call played again and again in my mind, each word sharper than the last. Forgotten family. As if my decades of sacrifice had vanished the second I said no. The next morning I heard the knock. Sharp, insistent. When I opened the door they stood there with bags. Megan with her glossy hair and tight smile. Alex behind her carrying 2 overstuffed suitcases. "We'll stay a few weeks," Megan said, brushing past me as though the decision was hers to make. "No," I said immediately, blocking her path. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Excuse me." "No," I repeated. "This is my house. You have your own." Alex dropped the bags with a thud. "Mom, don't do this." "I already did." Megan's voice slid in, smooth as oil. "Don't forget this when you're old and need us." The words struck like a knife. I saw her mouth curve as she said them, like she enjoyed delivering the wound. My throat tightened. I was 67, not ancient, not yet frail, but I knew what she was hinting at. The years when knees give out, when hands shake, when you need someone to bring soup or medicine. She wanted me to picture myself abandoned, helpless, punished for daring to hold my own key. Alex shifted from foot to foot, torn between anger and shame. But shame lost quickly. "You've got space. You live alone. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," I said, my voice shaking, "is that I've earned this space. Every inch of it. Alone. You don't get to take it from me." We stood in the doorway, the morning sun spilling across us like a spotlight. Megan's bags gleamed with gold zippers, her perfume cloyed the air. Alex's shoes scuffed my porch steps. They looked like trespassers but ones who believed they belonged. Finally, Megan yanked her suitcase upright. "Fine," she said coolly. "But remember this." She turned, her heels clicking down the walkway, Alex trailing behind. He looked back once, his face tight with resentment. Then they were gone. I shut the door, locked it, and pressed my forehead to the wood. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. I stared at the lock, a flimsy little brass thing I had never thought twice about, and suddenly it seemed paper thin. That night I checked it again and again. Jiggle the knob, slide the bolt, test the window latches, pace the floor, repeat. I left the hall light on until dawn. Every creak in the floorboards made me startle. The house that had once felt like sanctuary now felt fragile, as if walls could fold, as if keys could be copied, as if my son could stroll in whenever he wished. I tried to calm myself by looking at the marigolds outside. Their petals glowed in the porch light, stubborn little bursts of orange. I told myself they would hold just as I would hold. But in the pit of my stomach, fear had already taken root. I had spent decades fighting landlords, banks, bills. Now I realized the real invasion wasn't from outside. It was from within my own blood. And blood, once it scents money, does not retreat easily. It began on a Saturday morning. I was stirring sugar into my coffee, the marigolds outside glowing in the thin light, when I heard the metallic rattle. Keys. My lock turning. The front door swung open. Alex strolled in, as casual as if it had always been his house. He jingled the keys in his hand like a prize. "Megan made a copy," he announced. "Safety first." My coffee mug slipped against the saucer, rattling. "You what?" "She thought ahead," he said with that shrug I had come to dread. "In case of emergencies." Behind him Megan appeared, hair perfectly brushed, sunglasses perched on her head though it was barely dawn. She kissed the air near my cheek. "Relax, Nora. Families share. Don't you want us close? Isn't that safer?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to snatch the keys from his hand, to scream until the walls shook. Instead I called the police. When the officers arrived, their blue uniforms crisp against the autumn air, I poured out the story. The copied key, the invasion, the refusal to leave. One officer, a young man who looked barely older than Alex had been when he graduated, scratched his chin. "Civil matter, ma'am," he said at last. "They're family. Not much we can do." "Family doesn't break into your home," I snapped. But my words slid off their polished shoes. They left, nodding politely, promising nothing. Within hours my house was no longer mine. Day 1. They carried in a television the size of a door and shoved it against my living room wall, pushing aside my bookshelf. The hum of it drowned the silence I had cherished. Megan tossed my plants, my fern, my ivy, the spider plant I had nursed from a cutting, out onto the porch, pots cracking against the wood. Too cluttered, she declared, arranging their glossy black console instead. Day 2. I woke to find my coffee maker gone. In its place, a chrome monster with blinking buttons and a hiss like an angry snake. "It's an upgrade," Alex said when I protested. But when I tried to use it, the machine spat steam and left me holding a cup of bitter sludge. Day 3. Megan swept through my kitchen with a notepad, murmuring about improvements. By afternoon, she had borrowed $2,000 from the envelopes I kept hidden. My stomach dropped when I found the empty space where the cash had been. "Just for the upgrades," she explained, her voice sweet as spoiled fruit. "We'll pay it back after the sale." "The sale?" I demanded. Her smile widened. "When we sell, Nora. Obviously." Day 4. I came home from the bakery weary, smelling of bread, only to find 2 strangers in my bedroom. Painters. They rolled white over my coral walls, erasing my sunset stroke by stroke. My curtains lay crumpled in a corner. My dresser wore fresh flecks of paint like bruises. I stood in the doorway, paralyzed, the smell of latex thick as betrayal. "Brightens the room, doesn't it?" Megan said, stepping in behind me. "Neutral colors sell faster." Alex leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "It's better this way, Mom. Trust us." Trust. The word burned. I had trusted him with years of my wages, with my late husband's savings, with my homecoming each night. And now he stood calmly while strangers painted over the proof of my survival. I realized then this was not crisis. This was plan. Carefully laid, carefully executed. Megan's sharp eyes, Alex's sudden conviction, the copied key, the cash vanishing, the white paint smothering my coral. This was not temporary desperation. This was takeover. My stomach twisted. My chest ached as if the walls themselves were crushing me. I had built this refuge plank by plank, brushstroke by brushstroke, marigold by marigold. Now it was being stolen, not by strangers with crowbars, but by my own blood with paper and paint. That night I sat on my bed, my stripped, whitewashed bed, and forced myself to think. If family was a crowbar prying into the cracks of my life, then I had to become the deadbolt. The next morning I called lawyer Miles Hughes. His voice was calm, measured like a stone wall against the storm. "Block your accounts," he said firmly. "Every one of them. Keep records of what's been taken. Book a locksmith immediately." I obeyed. I marched to the bank, my back straighter than it had been in weeks, and shut the doors of my accounts with my own signature. I walked home with new paperwork tucked tight under my arm. Then I called the locksmith, my voice trembling but determined. Because if Alex and Megan had declared war on my freedom, then I would not surrender. Not quietly. Not ever. The locksmith arrived at 5 in the morning, just as the sky was beginning to pale. I had been awake all night, pacing, clutching my phone like a weapon, waiting for the knock that never came. When his white van pulled into the driveway, I nearly wept with relief. He was a small man, wiry and quiet, with hands that moved confidently over the brass of the lock. He didn't ask questions. Perhaps he saw the tension in my shoulders, the shadows under my eyes, the way I hovered like a guard while he unscrewed the bolts. Within an hour, every lock on the house had been replaced. Front door, back door, windows, even the side gate that led into the yard. He installed an extra latch on the front gate, heavy steel with a satisfying click when it closed. He handed me 3 sets of keys, each gleaming in the early light. "One for you," he said. "One for a trusted person. And one hidden just in case." I nodded, sliding the cool metal into my palm. My key. My choice. By the time the sun had fully risen, the cottage hummed with a different energy. The marigolds glowed brighter, the walls seemed to exhale, the silence felt safe again. I tucked 1 set of keys into the bottom of my work bag, gave another to Raoul next door. Steady Raoul, who had known me since I moved in, and kept the last on a chain around my neck. It hung there like a pendant, heavy but comforting. I thought foolishly that it might be over. By noon my phone began to explode. Call after call, message after message. Alex's voice sharp with disbelief. "Mom, what the hell? Our keys don't work. Open up. Then Megan's syrupy tone dripping with accusation. This is kidnapping, Nora. The kids need their toys. You can't keep them locked out. I silenced the phone. My hands trembled, but I did not answer. By evening, their car screeched into the driveway. They pounded on the door, their voices rising in a duet of rage and pleading. Open up. You can't do this. This is still our home too. I stood in the hallway, the new deadbolt glinting in the light, my heart hammering like a drum. The sound of their fists against the door shook the frame. My neighbors peered through curtains, their faces pale squares in the windows. I had witnesses. That was something. I cracked the door only when Raul came to stand at my side, his arms folded like a guard. Let them take what's theirs, he whispered. But nothing more. I opened the door just wide enough to let them through, under my eye, under Raul's silent watch. They hauled out their bags, their giant television, the monstrous coffee machine, the so-called new bedroom set they had bought with my stolen savings. The weight of each item scraping across my floor felt like a bruise, but I forced myself to stand tall. Megan hissed as she passed me, her voice low, venomous. You'll regret this. Alex lingered at the threshold, his eyes searching mine with something I couldn't read. Anger, disappointment, disbelief. Finally, he asked, Are you really choosing a house over family? The words caught in my chest, but I forced them out steady. I'm choosing dignity over abuse. He flinched as if struck. Then he grabbed the last bag and stormed out. The door closed behind them. Silence returned, broken only by the faint hum of my refrigerator. My knees buckled and I leaned against the wall, my breath shallow. I had done it. For the first time I had locked them out, not just with metal but with resolve. But victory is never clean. At dawn the next morning, I woke to the sound of pounding. Louder than before, heavier, like hammer striking wood. The walls shook with the force of it. My marigolds quivered in the early wind. I clutched the keys around my neck, their teeth pressing into my skin. The locks were strong. But I knew now locks could not keep away blood. And blood, once it tasted power, would always come back. It was 6:30 m.m. when the pounding began again, louder than before, rattling windows, shaking my walls like an earthquake. I pulled my robe tight, heart hammering, and went to the door expecting fists. Instead, when I looked through the peephole, I saw uniforms. 2 officers stood on my porch, hats shadowing their eyes. Behind them, Alex waved a sheaf of papers like a flag of conquest. Megan stood at his side, her face pale but triumphant, lips curled in satisfaction. I opened the door a crack, chains still fastened. Yes. My voice was steadier than I felt. Mrs. Clark, one officer asked. We have a warrant to investigate a domestic dispute. We've received documentation from your son and daughter-in-law that they reside here by your invitation. Megan stepped forward, eyes gleaming. She held out printed text messages, each one dripping with fake warmth. Come stay as long as you like. The house is yours too. Bring the kids, we'll make it work. All signed with my name, all written in a voice that wasn't mine. They were sent from your number, she said sweetly, her gaze locking on mine. You must have forgotten, Nora. You invited us. Forgotten. The word sliced me open. As if age had muddled me, as if I were already losing my mind. Alex thrust a handful of receipts at the officers. We've put money into this place. Look, improvements, furniture, paint. We're stakeholders. She can't just throw us out. I swallowed against the panic rising in my chest. I wanted to scream that the receipts were bought with my stolen cash, that the texts were fabrications. But the officer's eyes were unreadable, the law a cold wall between us. Then a voice cut through the morning air. Excuse me, officers. It was Raul, my neighbor, walking briskly across the yard. Behind him came another figure, Miles Hughes, my lawyer, his suit pressed, his expression calm but sharp. He had arrived within minutes of my call, the man who had told me to block my accounts, who believed me when even my own son treated me like an unreliable narrator of my own life. Miles scanned the papers with a quick, trained eye. His lips curved, not in amusement but in something colder. These are forgeries, he said flatly. He pointed to the margins. Metadata is broken. Wrong font for the carrier. Timestamps inconsistent with standard format. The officers shifted, glancing at one another. Megan's smile flickered. As for these receipts, Miles plucked one from Alex's hand, held it up to the light. They show purchases made on her debit card. Not yours. That's not proof of contribution, Mr. Clark. That's proof of theft. Alex's jaw clenched. We're family. It's not theft if it's shared. Miles raised a brow. Shared implies consent. Did your mother consent to you draining her accounts? Silence. The kind of silence that exposes more than words. The taller officer cleared his throat. Mr. Clark, Mrs. Clark, let's keep this civil. If you want to pursue claims, you'll need to do it through court. But forging documents to gain entry? He tapped the papers with his finger. That edges into criminal territory. Megan's face went pale. She tried to speak, but the words tangled. For the first time, her polished confidence cracked. Alex stepped forward, his eyes burning into mine. You won this battle, Mom, he said through clenched teeth. But you'll end up all alone. The words hung in the air, heavy as smoke. I met his gaze and felt something shift in me. Once the thought of loneliness terrified me. But now, after weeks of invasion and theft, alone no longer sounded like punishment. Alone sounded like peace. The officers returned the papers to Miles, who slipped them neatly into his briefcase. One more stunt like this, the taller one warned, and we'll move from civil to criminal charges. Do you understand? Megan nodded stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Alex's fists balled at his sides, but he said nothing more. They turned and walked down the steps, the autumn air sharp against their retreat. Neighbors' curtains twitched. Faces watched from windows. Raoul stood beside me, arms crossed, his presence a wall of quiet solidarity. Miles adjusted his tie, then gave me a small nod. You stood your ground, he murmured. Don't waver now. When the police car pulled away, silence returned. But it was a different silence than before. Not fragile, not fearful. A silence that hummed with justice held, at least for the moment. I closed the door, locked it with the new deadbolt, and pressed my palm flat against the coral-painted wall. My home still hummed to my key alone. And for the first time, when Alex's threat echoed in my mind, you'll end up all alone, I felt no fear. Only clarity. Alone, yes, but free. The day after the forged texts collapsed under Miles's sharp voice, I went to the courthouse. The building smelled of old paper and polish, its marble floors echoing with footsteps. I carried a folder under my arm, receipts, statements, photographs of my stripped bedroom. Proof that love had been twisted into theft. The clerk looked at me over her glasses when I requested a restraining order. Against your son? She asked, her tone more curiosity than judgment. Yes, I said steady. And his wife. She blinked, then slid the forms across the counter. I filled them out with slow, deliberate strokes of the pen. Each box I checked, each line I wrote, felt like chiseling stone, carving a boundary that no one, not even blood, could cross again. When I handed the papers back, my hands didn't tremble. That evening, I stood in the middle of my bedroom with a brush in hand. The white paint Alex and Megan had forced upon me gleamed sterile, foreign. It smelled of defeat. I opened a new can, its lid popping free with a metallic sigh, and dipped the brush into sunrise peach. The color bloomed on the wall in warm, defiant strokes. Not the coral I had first chosen, but something richer, deeper, the color of dawn after storm. I painted until my arms ached, until sweat dampened my neck, until every wall glowed again with a hue that was mine alone. With each stroke I erased their claim, their fingerprints, their plans. By the time the sun set, the room shimmered with warmth. I collapsed onto my bed, the smell of fresh paint surrounding me like a shield. The next morning I brewed coffee in my old, simple pot, not their chrome monstrosity, which now sat in Raoul's shed awaiting donation. I carried the cup outside and sat by my marigolds. Their orange petals were beginning to curl with the chill of autumn, but they still stood tall, faces turned toward the faint sun. My phone buzzed. A message from Jenna, my old friend from the bakery. How do you feel? I looked around me, at the marigolds, at the peach-glowing windows, at the silence so complete I could hear the faint hum of bees in the hedge. Free, I typed back. Later that week, Jenna came by. She walked through the cottage slowly, touching the walls, nodding. You've made it yours again, she said. I poured us both coffee and we sat at the small table, the same one where I had once counted bills for Alex's emergencies. It felt lighter now, as if the wood itself had exhaled. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Regret what?" "Saying no." I thought of Alex's face, twisted with anger. Megan's hiss of, "You'll regret this." I thought of the thousands of dollars I had poured into their lives, money that could have gone to travel, to rest, to ease. I thought of my nights pacing with fear, my mornings waking to the sound of invasion. "No," I said firmly. "I regret only that it took me so long." She reached across the table, squeezed my hand and nodded. Nights grew quieter. I no longer woke at every creak. The locks held. The house held. I began to trust the silence again. Some evenings I lit candles and read by their glow, the walls shimmering peach around me. Other nights I simply sat in the dark, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator, the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Silence had once been loneliness. Now it was victory. I tended my marigolds even as autumn nipped at them, covering their roots with mulch, whispering to them like companions. "You made it through," I told them. So did I. One afternoon Jenna asked if I was lonely. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But solitude isn't emptiness. It's a border. A protection. When you share your space with people who don't respect you, silence is the sweetest sound you can own." She smiled, though her eyes shone. "You're stronger than most, Nora." Strength, I thought, wasn't what I wanted. I wanted peace. But perhaps peace only comes after strength has been proven. Weeks passed. The restraining order was granted. The papers arrived in the mail, heavy with legal authority. Alex and Megan were forbidden to come within 100 yards of my house. I held the document in my hands, tracing the black letters with my finger. It felt both pitiful and powerful, that I had needed the law to keep my own blood away, but that at last I was protected. Sometimes in the early mornings I still heard echoes. The slam of fists on the door. The hiss of Megan's voice. The weight of Alex's accusation, "You'll end up all alone." But those echoes faded faster now. They were ghosts, and ghosts lose power when you refuse to feed them. I continued to bake bread, though not in the bakery's industrial ovens. Just simple loaves in my own kitchen. The smell filled the house, warm and yeasty, reminding me of decades of labor but now tied to no one's hunger but mine. I sliced thick pieces, spread them with butter, ate them slowly while the marigolds nodded outside the window. In the evenings I sometimes walked the block. Neighbors waved. Raoul often joined me, talking of his garden, his late wife, the weather. I found comfort in these small, ordinary exchanges. The house hummed to my key alone. Each turn of the lock was a song of independence. Each night I slid the bolt home. I felt a small surge of triumph. People think betrayal ends with explosions, screaming, broken plates, slammed doors. But the truest end is silence. The silence of a phone that no longer rings with demands. The silence of walls that echo only your own footsteps. The silence of a life reclaimed. Sometimes, sitting on the porch with coffee, I ask myself if I failed as a mother. If love should have meant more forgiveness, more tolerance, more sacrifice. But then I remember the look in Megan's eyes, the way Alex shrugged as my coral walls disappeared, the laughter in their voices as they spoke of selling my house. And I know forgiveness is not the same as surrender. I sip my coffee, watch the marigolds bend gently in the breeze, and whisper to the quiet air, "I chose myself." And the silence, my silence, answers back.